Hi everyone. Hello from my new home. Yes, it actually feels a little strange and also very nice to say that. I have just moved, and as you can probably imagine, the last few days have been full of boxes, bags, organizing things, deciding where everything belongs, and trying to make a completely new space slowly feel like mine. Moving is really exhausting. I think everyone has moved recently will understand what I mean. But it is also interesting emotionally because while I was packing, I started thinking about something very simple. When does a house actually become a home? Is it when you receive the keys, when you put your books on the shelves, when you make your first coffee there? And I did it actually. When you finally stop looking around and thinking, this feels unfamiliar. I don't know, but because I have been thinking about home so much lately, I thought this would be the perfect moment to return to a literary text that asks exactly these things of questions. So, welcome back to Literature Power series. Today we are talking about Sandra Cisneros, The House on Mango Street. I have talked about this book before on my channel, I remember, but today I want to read it from a very much more specific perspective. Not simply as a coming of age story, not only as a story about identity. Today, I want to think about the house itself. Because in this book, a house is never just a building, if you remember. I strongly recommend it if you don't read. It is a class, it is identity, it is belonging, it is aspiration, and sometimes it is shame. At the center of the book is Esperanza Cordero, a young Latino girl growing up in Chicago. Esperanza and her family moved to a house on Mango Street. And technically, this is something they have wanted. A house of their own, no landlord, no shared building, no constantly moving from one place to another. So we might expect Esperanza to be happy. But she isn't, because the house she imagined and the house she receives are very different things. And I think this distinction is incredibly important. Esperanza doesn't simply want shelter. She has already imagined what a home is supposed to look like. She has an image in her mind, and that image has been shaped by society. This is where literature becomes very interesting because sometimes our desires don't begin entirely inside us. Culture teaches us what to desire, what kind of house represents success, what kind of neighborhood represents achievement, what kind of life means that we have finally made it. So Esperanza's disappointment is not really about architecture. It is about the distance between reality and expectation. And honestly, moving into a new home made me think about this differently. When we move, we carry so many expectations with us. We imagine how the space will look, how we'll organize it, what our mornings will feel like, where we'll read, where we'll work. But a home doesn't become meaningful because it matches an image. It becomes meaningful because we began living inside it. And Esperanza hasn't reached that feeling yet. For her, the house on Mango Street initially represents what she doesn't have. There is also a strong connection between the house and the social class. Where you live tells other people something about you, or at least society assumes that it does. Your neighborhood, your street, the size of your house, whether you own or rent, all of these things become social signs. And Esperanza becomes painfully aware of that. This is why shame becomes part of her relationship with home. She doesn't only see the house, she imagines other people seeing the house. And that distinction matters because shame often requires an audience. We become ashamed when we imagine ourselves through someone else's eyes. And I think this is where the concept of power becomes very visible in the novel. Power is not always someone directly telling you that you are inferior. Sometimes power works much more quietly. It teaches you what success looks like, and then it allows you to compare yourself to that image. But there is another dimension of home in the novel that I find very more interesting. For Esperanza, having a house of her own eventually becomes connected to independence. Underline it, please. She begins imagining a different home, a space that belongs to her, not because she wants to display wealth, not because she wants to impress anyone, but because she wants a room for herself, a space where she can think, write, create, exist without constantly being defined by other people's expectations. And suddenly, the meaning of the house changes. It stops being a status symbol. It becomes a symbol of autonomy, right? And for a young woman, especially within the gendered world Cisneros presents, that matters enormously. Throughout the book, we encounter women whose relationships to houses are complicated. Some are confined within them, some look through windows, some are limited by husbands, fathers, economic circumstances, or social expectations. So the house can represent safety, but it can also represent confinement. And I think that contradiction is one of the most powerful things about this book. We often use the word home automatically as something positive. Home means comfort, safety, family, belonging. But literature reminds us that home doesn't mean the same thing to everyone. For some people, living home is freedom. For others, finding a home is freedom. And for Esperanza, perhaps freedom means eventually creating a home on her own terms. There is another part of the novel that I think is essential. Esperanza dreams of living Mango Street, but the book doesn't simply celebrate escape. But she gradually understands that living does not mean forgetting. That is such an important distinction. You can move away from a place and still carry it with you. Actually, I think we all do this. Every place we have lived leaves something in us: a room, a street, a window, a neighbor, a sound, even a particular kind of light in the afternoon. We move physically, but memory doesn't move in the same way. It accumulates, and perhaps that is why moving can feel emotional. You are not simply changing an address. You are closing one version of your everyday life and beginning another. This is also make me think about belonging. We often imagine belonging as something passive. Either you belong somewhere or you don't. But maybe belonging is something we create. We build routines. We place our books somewhere. We recognize the sounds of neighborhood. We find our favorite corner. And eventually, without realizing exactly when it happened, the unfamiliar becomes home. I think literature works in a similar way. When we first enter a book, we don't know the world, we don't know the characters, we don't understand the rhythms. But slowly, page by page, we begin to inhabit it. Maybe reading itself is a kind of moving. We temporarily move into somebody else's world. And when we leave, we take something with us. For me, this is also why The House on Mango Street belongs in Literature Power series, because the book asks us to think about who has access to space, who gets to choose where they live, who gets privacy, who gets mobility, who feels trapped, and who has the power to imagine another life. A house seems like such an ordinary thing, but once literature begins examining it, suddenly we see class, gender, ethnicity, memory, aspiration, and power all living inside the same walls. And that is what I love about literary analysis. It teaches us that ordinary things are rarely just ordinary. And today, staying here in my new home, I think I understand this text a little differently than I did before. Not because my experience is the same as Esperanza's, it isn't, but because moving reminds you how emotionally complicated space can be. A house is physical, a home is something else. A home takes time, it takes memory, it takes routines, it takes a sense of belonging, and perhaps most importantly, it takes the feeling that you are allowed to become yourself there. So maybe that's the question I want to leave you with today. What makes a place feel like home to you? Is it the people, person, the memories, your books, a particular room, or simply the feeling that you can completely be yourself there? I would genuinely love to hear your answers. And from my new home, thank you for joining me for another episode of Literature Power series. I'm very happy to be back, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye.